Hey everybody, welcome. My name is Dane Sanders. This is Fast Track Coaching. We've been doing the show for a better part of 3 years, and it's meant to be a conversation where you get to listen in, but hopefully participate around topics that will hopefully move your creativity or your business or your business forward. Both are fine. Our aim is not to change the world. Our aim is to simply make a little contribution every week in a way that would that you could actually get your hands around and do something with in the next couple of days. So hopefully that's what you'll get out of today's conversation. And before we get going, I definitely want to thank our sponsors at Arama for doing so much to make this possible, underwriting this so it's always free for you guys, both these and the past shows. And just as a reminder, if you go to blog.fasttrackphotographer.com, we have, again, just a showcase of great conversations with everyone from Seth Godin to Jeremy Cowart to Vincent Laforet to on and on and on. Some both within the photo industry and well beyond the photo industry. So hopefully that'll be helpful for you. I encourage you to check that out. But for today's conversation, I'm very pleased to have a friend, and it's kind of fun, Stacey. We've been friends for a while now. But Stacey Pearsall's on today, and welcome.
Thank you.
That's my dog.
I appreciate it.
That's my dog Zoe, by the way, and she may be part of the show. That's just what she does.
Well, I have my dog at my feet too.
You do?
She's passed out right now, so she comes to the office with me every day.
That's great. What kind of dog do you have?
She's a Welsh Corgi rescue.
A Welsh Corgi? What, that must be. Is that a really ugly dog, or is it a pretty dog?
No, it's the Queen's dog. She's surrounded by them.
Oh, I know those dogs.
Yeah.
So the Queen threw one out, and you got to rescue her. That's really cool.
I did. She's right from the castle, so she's good.
That's great. Well, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the show or are here for the first time, this is really meant to be a dialogue and one that you engage with. And because we're having this conversation in advance of you guys watching it live, but we are going to be live with you. So when this is broadcasting, we're in the chat room, we're on Twitter, and we want to engage in the dialogue. But we've just discovered over the years that it's a lot to deal with the technological glitches that always come up. Chatting, having a thoughtful conversation. It doesn't feel like we're very present in the dialogue. At least for me, it's been challenging. So I decided to start pre-recording these Skype calls, and then having a set time that everyone gets to watch it for the first time, and that's what people are tuning in on. But we are with you right now. So even as we're here and you're watching it and it's in history, we're in the chat room right now, and hopefully you'll have a chance to dialogue and engage. So as you do, please do, and you can ask direct questions to either of us in that context. But I have a hunch many of the questions we'll address in the conversation. So Stacey, to get started, I'm wondering, the topic of today is going to be around building a portfolio around your passion. But before we get there, you have an amazing history photographically and well beyond that, and serving our country and in tremendous ways. And I'm wondering if you could recap some of that for folks that maybe are unfamiliar with you and your work.
When I was 17, I wanted to do something in the arts, and definitely was thinking about college, and I had a few colleges in mind, but I come from a military family, so obviously I was looking at colleges as well as the military, and being 17 and kind of foolhardy, of course I'm going to go for the biggest challenge. So I found out that I could get a job in the arts, whether that be graphics, design, or photography. And I said, okay, it doesn't matter, whichever one opens up first. And as luck would have it, photography opened up. And so in 1997, I entered the delayed enlistment program. And then, and I was halfway through high school, or my senior year of high school. And while my classmates marched in their caps and gowns, I was marching in formation. So that kind of was really how I started. Now, I didn't go right away into photography. They actually stuck me in a lab for 4 years, and it wasn't like a regular lab, like not like a Ritz camera lab or something like that. It was a special lab to process IR film, like highly light sensitive IR film. And most of the time we were in a vault because it came off the U-2 spy plane.
Wow.
So all the reconnaissance missions that were being flown, the film would come to us to process, and we would process that film and make bomb targets and things like that. it sounds really intriguing, but trust me, it's not. It's for a 17-year-old who really, really wanted to do photography and something fun in the arts and ending up in a vault within a vault within a vault and then not being able to tell anybody about it was not my ideal. The only saving grace was that I got to get stationed in Europe for a couple of years, go to night school, get my ball rolling, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I set my sights on, sorry, I'm going to close that out. I set my sights on combat camera, which was a special duty unit, and it was predominantly male, though there were a few females in there. And I said, well, if they can do it, I can do it. I hadn't touched a camera in 4 years, though. That was the problem. So my dad gave me his film camera, so I took his film camera, started shooting whenever I could.
What kind of camera was it?
It was a Pentax, and it was like 1960s something.
Yeah, I think it's awesome.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, looking back, I wish I still had it, but unfortunately, some hoodlums stole it out of my car when I was living in England, like right before I left. So I don't have it anymore. But at any rate, it was enough of a portfolio to get me into combat camera. And a lot of stars had to align for that to happen. A position had to open up, and I had to not only perform in photography, but also in my physical abilities and my professional abilities. So there was more to combat camera than just being a good photographer.
No kidding.
And yeah, well, I think that applies to anybody in any occupation, and especially in the photography industry, you have to wear so many hats, and you know that just as well as I do.
Well, for sure, but that context that you were in is just extraordinary. I mean, it's so fun. I'm actually lining up all my questions because there's one of the reasons why I got into photography in the first place was I remember I was taking my first photo class, and there was a picture that actually he didn't even take, but Jim Natchway is in the picture. And I talk about this all the time, but there's like the wall of AP cameras, and then about 100 yards in advance of that is him by himself, about 3 feet from a terrorist running down in one direction. And I just saw that picture and I was like, that won't be my life. I have 4 kids and I live in Pleasantville, USA. But I thought if I had a fantasy life, that would be it, because you're not actually killing people, but you're actually you're capturing things that are pretty extraordinary. And that's, I mean, if you look at your body of work, that's what you've done over and over again.
Yeah.
Was it a different kind of experience to be for the military combat camera person versus someone like Jim, who is in more this kind of freelance storytelling mode? Is there a difference, do you think?
I think there are very subtle nuances between both fields, being a civilian photojournalist and being a military photojournalist, because I adhere to the same standards outlined by the National Press Photographers Association's ethics guidelines. So, I mean, ethically, I did the same things that my civilian counterparts did. And sometimes I was out there with civilian journalists like Eros Hoagland or Yuri Kozarev, who was out there for years in Iraq. So,
wow.
The one thing that was positive, though, was, someone like Eros, or somebody who's, working for New York Times or USA Today, they're going to go out there for a few weeks and then they're going to come home to the States. Whereas we live and breathe the military just like all the other ones who are traditionally deployed. So I think it gave me an opportunity to build a longer lasting relationship with the soldiers that I was documenting, and also really tell the story from a more personal perspective, because not only was I photographing it, but I was living it too, and I think that helped me convey those emotions a little easier.
That's helpful. So one of the things that I always like to do is, in these conversations, is I try to put myself in the position of the people who are listening in, and I make up stuff in my head all the time about what they might be thinking. But a lot of things come to mind, like, for example, on a popularized Hollywood level, we walk around and we see movies like Hurt Locker, or, those kinds of kind of dramatizations of what life is like in that context. And obviously it's nothing, it's Hollywoodized. But but in a gracious way as you can, for civilian types who really don't have a clue what that world is like, paint us a little bit of a picture of like what a day in the life of a photographer is in that context.
Okay. Well, I mean, I know there are a lot of Hollywood movies out there, and if anybody's really interested in seeing the real deal, there's a a documentary called Restrepo, which I thought
Restrepo,
really hit home.
Restrepo. Okay.
Restrepo, R-E-S.
D-C-T.
So I feel like, obviously Hollywood's always going to have a spin on it, but
Sure.
that documentary really showed what it was really like to be out there. But, my normal day really varied depending on what the mission was. But I went to 8 different countries, and each experience was different. In Iraq, I was in Iraq 3 different times, so not one deployment was the same as the next, because, the units changed and the parts of the country that I was in were different, so the culture was different as well.
Yeah.
But, on my last combat deployment was, was during the surge, and it was hell on earth. I'd say that was by far the worst place I had ever been at that given time. And
what does hell look like? What does that mean?
Hell would be 110 degrees in the day and 30 degrees at night, and hell would be making a best friend and losing them the next day. That's hell. And I think I could go without eating, I could go without sleep, and I did. But I think the most emotional parts are having the understanding that I was the last person to ever take these soldiers' pictures that their wives and their moms and their dads would ever touch or would ever have. And I think that aside from all of the award-winning photojournalism that I did make, those were the most impactful to me and the ones that meant the most.
Yeah, I can't, none of us can really imagine that context. But even just what I make up in my mind around what you're describing just sounds despairing, or potentially despairing. How did you find a ground in the middle of that to keep your sanity?
My husband, and he was also in the service. He did 20 years as a combat photographer, and when on deployments we would deploy at the same time. We wouldn't be at the same location, mind you, but. It was those letters that we'd send back and forth to each other, even if it's just "I love you" note. And I think hi puppy, if I had anything to live for, it would have, it was always him that kept going, and also having my teammates there. If I, who was the ranking individual and I was the team leader, showed any sign of weakness, then that would give them grounds to feel that despair and feel weak, and it was my responsibility to be the strength and the pillar. And one very unique thing is I was a woman amongst hundreds of men, and so I think it put me in a unique position where the male soldiers would not necessarily want to show weakness amongst themselves or show emotion necessarily. So when tragedies did happen, they came to me, and that's why I say photographers wear many hats. And I think for me in particular, in those very unique situations, I was the counselor, the mother, the sister, the manager.
Well, it sounds like the human. I mean, on some level, human as you are, and having the asset of femininity just sounded like, in that context, a remarkable resource for individuals that otherwise they might not have had access to. I mean, that's extraordinary. I wonder. I want to jump back and forth a little bit because honestly, my whole family's military. I think you know this, but a lot of folks know. Like my dad was a cop. He died when I was very young. My grandfather was a military hero for the Canadian military and in World War II, and so my heart. It's easy to hang out here for a while and just kind of like, oh gosh, the pain of it. But at the same time, there's a lot to celebrate in what these heroes are standing for. But I'd like to actually jump back and forth and jump from kind of Iraq for a minute and all the other countries you've been in back here to the U.S. And I want us to talk specifically about being a woman as a photographer. And I got myself in some hot water, and I think I probably I should have written it differently, but I wrote a blog post probably a year ago now around around femininity and as a male looking at women thinking, gosh, which I'm already out of bounds as soon as I say that, but that's the unique strengths and the unique times that we're in for women in this field. Can you talk a little bit about being uniquely, well, just being a woman in our context, and not in military context, but just as a photographer, and what do you think are the trade-offs in terms of opportunities and liabilities?
Well, I think, having come from, the male-dominated portion of the profession, I think it gave me a unique vision. I mean, everybody's vision, whether male or female, is going to be unique because you can't take that away from somebody.
That's right.
But I think, as a woman, I think I looked at things just from a different. Maybe the guys looked at it from 45 degrees and I saw it from, 35. But, that I think was a strength. And
absolutely.
Definitely I had a lot of hurdles as far as, having to prove myself over and over and over again. And I think a lot of women will run into that, or probably have run into that. And I know that a lot of my mentors, Mary Calvert and these women definitely looked at those hurdles in a not as a way that would be defeating, but in a way to say, hey, if I accomplish this and I have to go that extra mile, it's only going to make me a better person and a better professional photographer. And it was really their strengths that they passed on to me and encouragement that I think is uniquely female because in a very competitive world of photography, there aren't a lot of people that want to give it away so freely. But I think women amongst other women are much more apt to do so. And I know there's probably guys out there like, well, that's BS. But because I had a lot of male mentors as well. But I think the community of women within photography, though small, is definitely supportive of each other. I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, it does. It opens up more questions, actually. I'm mindful of, okay, so the context you were in before in the military where you were kind of the lone woman in the context of all these guys. Then you come back to the U.S. And, wherever you're shooting from in the world, where it seems like tides have shifted, where it was a good old boys club. And all of this is broad strokes and 1,000 exceptions to the rule. So with that qualifier stated, it seems as though and if you just count the numbers, a lot more women own cameras now and are trying to shoot professionally. And the tide of the industry feels very different. I mean, if you just go to Photo Plus or even WPI or whatever, there's just a lot more women. And
well, I think it's exciting.
I think it's thrilling. I mean, I have 3 daughters. I love the idea. And at the same time, though, there are unique nuances because I see different strategies being employed. Like it's kind of like, it reminds me of sport. Like there's some female athletes that mimic male athletes, and I think that's a miss because they could, there's something unique in what they could bring to the table that doesn't mimic how do you be the best female photographer. It's no, how do you be the best photographer and you happen to be a woman and leverage that as a strength. So given those, you are really in a unique position. You've experienced both realities kind of firsthand. What advice do you want to give to, and I want to get to all photographers in a minute, but specifically women, about how to move their creativity and their businesses forward in the context that we're in, because it's a different age.
Okay. Well, I think women have always been photographers, maybe just not professionally. I mean, I think it's probably safe to say that all mothers take pictures of their kids at some point in time, because I know my mom was the one that took all the pictures of my albums. Yeah. So they've taken it from out of being, a house mom into being a professional photographer, and I think that's perfectly fine. I think one thing to focus on as a female photographer isn't necessarily one's weakness or say, like you've already said, I want to mimic this person or be like this person, but to find where your strengths are. And if instead of trying to cover 1,000 things and try and get sports and portraits and weddings and everything else, then narrow your focus. If like for me, I get really excited about making portraits of military people. That's what excites me. So, I built a portfolio around not necessarily combat anymore, but military-related topics.
Mm-hmm.
And that excites me.
Well, and that flows right out of your life's resume. I mean, that's... part of me is like, well, what else would you... I mean, there's 1,000 things you could because of personal interest.
I got out of the service and I was like, well, what now? What do I do now? And I was trying to do that. I was trying to do baby portraits, and I was trying to, maybe is weddings my thing? But I was like, I was forcing myself into what I thought outside of the military photographer was supposed to be. But that wasn't the case. I realized that the minute I started doing, again, military-related sort of photography, whether that be commercial stuff or more photojournalism, I was really in my element. And I encourage, not just female photographers, but photographers at large, if they have something they're passionate about outside of photography, whether that be, being a dog handler and doing, agility courses, then there may be photography in that.
Right.
And, you get to have the best of both worlds in what you do and make a niche for yourself and create a portfolio specifically around something you're passionate about. And it's always going to be that passion that really sparks creativity in your photography and what draws people to that positive energy. Because if you're not happy going to work trying to make a portfolio of all these things that fit in that square, it's going to show in the work. So,
any advice for guys from your perspective?
I think the same rules apply. That my husband's a photographer too, and he's like, well, I like photographing American flags and clouds. And I'm like, fine, whatever floats your boat, if that's what excites you. Ultimately, it has to, we all have bills to pay to keep the lights on and things. So you have to find a nice creative way to make that portfolio come back and make some money for you. So maybe for my husband, it's pretty cloud prints for people's walls, or a calendar, or advertising in some way. But I mean, for somebody who likes dog agility, they could do dog portraits, or they could do sports action stuff with dog agility. I'm just using that as a generality, but I think the same.
No, that makes total sense to me. I mean, that intersection between passion and opportunity, it does seem like, in my conversations with a lot of photographers, the folks that are kind of wanting to emerge and find a name for themselves, they seem to be erring on the side of looking for being opportunistic, which I appreciate, but at the same time missing what they're passionate about, or they're super passionate about a niche but don't want to commercialize it because it's so precious to them. And what I'm struck by is the folks that seem to have emerged are the ones that have found that vein of the things they care deeply for, that fit in the context of the flow of their life, and they've been shrewd about it, and they've thought like, okay, well, if I love, like you say, let's say I love horses and equestrian, well, then think about from the perspective of customers what they would love about those things, and put yourself in the best possible position to deliver on that opportunity. But that idea of like, so if you're listening in, what do you guys think at home about the cross section of passion and opportunity, and what could be most beneficial? Go ahead. Were you gonna ask
no,
me?
I think there's somebody out there. His name's Clark Little, and he
I know
photographs.
Clark. Yeah. Well, Clark was in Hawaii at the Maui Photo Festival a while back.
Yeah, he photographs waves. I mean, he's a surfer who.
He doesn't just do waves. I mean, if you guys don't know Clark Little, I love his work, man. I don't understand it. I've tried to actually, the way he kind of gets under like little waves and like does a little thing, and I remember getting up real early, and the light's great, and I'm freezing, and I'm getting low, and I can't pull it what he does. It's just unbelievable.
But he has an understanding of that passion. He knows from a surfer's perspective, or somebody who appreciates the ocean that much, and that's why his stuff has that sparkle, it has that zing, and I think that applies to anybody, whether it's food photography, because I know I love to eat. But if there's somebody who likes to do chef work at night or something like that, you can do both.
Well, it's funny you say that. Like, we had Penny D'Alessio on a while back. She's a food photographer, and she is amazing. But she actually, her bent isn't to take pictures of food, but hers is to tell stories about culture through food. So her big take is she believes that you can find out anything about any culture by just looking at what they eat. So she'll set up these great essays on like juxtaposing fast food in inner city U.S. versus what they're eating in inner city India, and it's just, I mean, just mind blowing stuff, and it comes from passion for both those things. So I think that's great insight. Hey, I want to go back, something you mentioned at the very beginning in the early days when you were in the lab with the light sensitive stuff that no one could know about. Talk a little bit about, and again, I get that it wasn't that sexy at the time, but in a sense, what those infrared kind of drones were doing is it seems like from the outside looking in, they're just trying to get a lot of data from limited information because it's in the dark. And it reminds me a little bit of like 204,000 ISO on the newer cameras. What is there a sense in which, and I can't imagine what military grade stuff is right now in those categories, but what do you think of the way equipment is evolving and what's possible, especially given the context of what you've seen on the military side? I know it's exciting, but beyond just excitement, what's my question? I'm excited about these things. What do you think?
Technology advancement.
Yeah.
Well, when I first joined the service, I don't know if you remember this, but they took like the N90, the Nikon N90. They put like a Kodak adaptation on the bottom to make it a digital version, and the flash cards, or I don't know what they were back then. They weren't flash cards. They're like this big,
right.
And they were
they're actually drives. They were actually moving cards.
Yeah, they were drive, right? And they were like 512.
Right.
That's it, if you can imagine. And then if you dropped it, it was done. It broke. And so, we were still using the and I'm going to get to a point, I promise. But we were still using the U-2 spy plane.
Right.
To accomplish these missions. And it literally costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to launch this plane because it flies on the atmosphere. It takes somebody who's nearly an astronaut to fly it. And it's very, very dangerous. But the satellite systems that we launched into space had new cameras, and cameras were being developed kind of like that N90 with that Kodak adaptation. Mm-hmm. At first it was terrible resolution, and we couldn't really make out anything. And if you wanted to zoom into a nuclear power plant or a bridge or foot trails, things like that, it would not stand up to the U2 film that we were doing. But I mean, in a span of 4 years, it went from you can't see anything on the satellite imagery to wow, I can't believe I can see that. And it's already in the sky. It's cheaper than flying the U-2.
Right.
And that's when we started getting phased out. Thank you, Jesus.
That's funny. Yeah, well, it is astonishing. Given all of that, any predictions on where you think the trajectory of technology is headed?
Well, I mean, if you look at the, I shoot Nikon, so that's what I speak. That's what I speak to. But the file size, huge. I mean, I don't even know what to do with most of that file. I mean, it's big, and it's only going to get bigger and better. Mm-hmm. And I think technology. Even the prosumer cameras, they ain't too shabby.
They're not. I'm pretty convinced my 4S camera is better than most cameras I shot with full weddings at the beginning. And in fact, I'm very confident that's true. But I'm still glad I have my other gear. But in terms of what's possible, because prosumer cameras are improving and there's so many people getting in the game, and this is actually the guts of what I really want to hear from you on is how can, and you've already spoken to this a little bit in terms of picking your genre or your focal point, but in the context of finding your passion, looking for opportunity, and this kind of third leg of technology emerging at a pace that's just mind-boggling, like all that we can actually accomplish now. How would you recommend someone who's again kind of in that startup mode or restart mode, leveraging the technology to stand out further than what everyone else is doing? Like, I'm reminded of, we just had Vincent Laforet on the show, and I know you know Vincent, and he he was the first guy to get his hands on the 5D Mark II. He goes and makes this movie. All of a sudden, he's like, well, I'm not going to leverage the 5D Mark II to do what I've always done, that I've won Pulitzers with. I'm going to actually go further. and he became a filmmaker, and all of a sudden he's buddies with Spielberg and people, and I'm just struck by his willingness to jettison the past, to leverage the technology, to stay in alignment with his passion, and find massive opportunity in a moment when there's gazillions of people coming in. And I actually asked him about photojournalism, and he said, "Yeah, I just wouldn't do that anymore," which is amazing to me, given the guy is such a hero in that world. But any thoughts on, again, the kind of all of those pieces together to get a leg up and find position?
Well, you could go out and purchase a $5,000 DSLR body. That's fine, but if you don't know how to operate it, you might as well try to take pictures with a stick. It doesn't make any sense. So in order to be a good professional photographer, you have to be continuously educating yourself. And I don't care if you've been in the game for 20 years, 30 years, whatever. Something new is going to come out tomorrow, and you're not going to go jack all about it. And I know I do that every day. I'm educating myself. So that's one of the biggest important things. Like, you should never be above education. And the other thing is, photojournalism, we're a dying breed, unfortunately, in the traditional sense that, like traditional AP photographers like Eddie Adams or, these guys that really, that I looked up to, or, I still look up to, even though he's gone. But, finding new ways to apply that profession in a unique way. Like you said, Vince went on to do video stuff. But, people like Ed Kashi are doing multimedia, and that's really interesting. Tom Kennedy kind of set the bar in that direction, and I'm constantly trying to do new and fun things. And with lighting, I didn't touch. Outside of my little SBs, when I was in the service, I didn't touch lights at all. And
I don't know how you could in the context. You're ducking fire.
No, it's like shoot me. We didn't use flash, so when I got out, there was a learning curve, and I was lucky to, my buddy Joe McNally kind of took me by the elbow and said, "No, go down this path." And I started learning photography, and went from small strobes to big lights, and how do I apply big lights into what I do in photojournalism and make it a unique thing? And so I think being creative, which is what photographers are, we are artists and we are creative minds. So taking what we think is unique and fun and making a project out of it and pushing yourself. And hey, I've fallen on my face 1,000 times, and you can't be afraid to do that. Yeah. Maybe not with a paid client. You shouldn't be doing that, but when you're in between those things, finding that.
Well, it's funny. I've never met Joe in person. I'm a big fan of his. In fact, I'd love for you to introduce me, because I'd like to actually have him on the show sometime. But Joe is someone who I'm just impressed with in his commitment to playing. Like, for a guy who clearly he knows lighting pretty well, and it does help that he's got some great sponsors. But he's just messing with gear, and he's intentionally trying to break gear. Like, he pushes it to get to the point where. And honestly, I appreciate that, because not only does it benefit him, because he's really getting nuance and specifics, and how can I tweak it and go further with this and just do something new, and at the same time he's figuring stuff out for the rest of us that don't get free gear that you can break, and we can learn from it. But even the principle behind that, like, there's so much in what you're saying from a perspective of staying in this constant learning posture. Being willing to go, okay, with every new day is new technology, which isn't I get to go out and go buy new gear and that's going to make me. That means I better, if I'm going to leverage technology, I better understand it, and that's going to take a lot of work. A willingness to mess around even when you're not getting paid to do that. Like, all of those principles make a ton of sense to me. And again, that ultimately leads to my final question for you, which is second final question. I have another one, and it's a question I've asked you in the past. I want to ask you again to see if it's changed. In building a portfolio around your passion, and advice you would give to folks who are listening in, is there any kind of final words, especially, and I'll just combine the questions, especially if people are like, look, first quarter 2012 is a make or break quarter for me. It's the toughest. Let's say they're portrait photographers, or a lot of my listeners tend to be that, wedding photographers, that sort of thing, and some commercial folks. But let's say it's a down part of the year. There's not a lot going on. people are spending money at trade shows and that sort of thing, and they're not actually making as much money as they do, say, in the fall season. What advice do you tell them to kind of build a portfolio, a body of work around the things they care about, but that's also instrumental to them having a viable business? What do they do in the next 3 months?
Well, I mean, I know the winter months are the same for me. It's like you have to squirrel away some nuts, to make it last through the year. It's the tough part of the year, but it's also a really great opportunity when there is a lull in that, a lull in the amount of clients that you're getting to take that opportunity to build that special portfolio and to really carve out time and direction with yourself. I usually like to say, start here. Make a sentence. One sentence that kind of outlines the direction you want to go. And that could be, I want to focus on taking portraits of horses or equestrians, particularly with dressage or hunter jumper or fox hunting. And you make it a sentence. If you can't fit it in a sentence, it's not concise enough, and you're going to be going willy-nilly for 3 months and not making any direction. But I assure you that if you get it down to one sentence and you say, okay, I want to have X amount of portraits set by such and such date, and that's, you give yourself 30 days to get 30 portraits. I love that. And you build a portfolio for yourself, and you're like, okay, how can I improve this? Do I add a light? Do I add, a light bank or a scrim or a reflector? And how do I improve upon this? And then you give yourself another week. And you should be constantly improving this portfolio and constantly improving. And then what's going to happen is, as you go out and you find these people to be your subjects, they're going to be like, oh, well, Sally came by and she took my portrait of me and my horse. Look at it. Isn't this great? And then all of a sudden somebody says something to somebody else. That's and right. Then everybody in the horse community is like wildfire. Like, well, how do we get them out to our barn? How do we get them to our events? And then all of a sudden, what was meant to be part of your training and part of your building of your portfolio has actually ultimately added advertising for yourself, and in turn revenue for that spring period or that summer period when business should be booming.
Stacey, you're brilliant. If you're listening to this, just go do what she said, and if you're not into horses, just take that out and insert whatever you want. That fantastic breakdown, and really what you've done is you've chunked down a really doable path in 30 days for somebody to not only build be in the building process of their body of work, but also get in the conversation with real people that could ultimately be your customer. That is the game. And I'm always amazed at the simplicity of that recipe, yet the resistance for people to actually go do that.
I don't know. I mean, I still have to do this week or this week. And
right.
If you just set one day, you say, okay, Tuesdays are my shoot days.
Yeah.
Wednesdays are my process days. That's 2 days out of your week, in a 30-day window. That's not that bad. It's doable.
Yeah.
And you're only going to get back what you put into it. So hopefully you put a lot into it and you'll get a lot back.
Well, Stacey, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's always a treat to be in conversation with you, and I'm hoping I'm going to get a chance to see you a couple times this year. Now, is there anything that folks could be aware of if they want to get a chance to bump into you in person this year, or where you might be?
Well, I'm going to be going to Photoshop World in Washington, D.C. I'm going to be at Shoot the West, and I have a book coming out this year, so that I'm going to be on a lot of book tours. So if you see me coming to your town, come and see me, and we'll chat.
That's great. And tell me about the book.
Oh, well, it's a collection of my military photographs and some essays that kind of go along with it about my experiences. And
who are you publishing with?
What's that?
Who are you publishing with?
It's Peak Press.
Oh, cool.
And it'll be out in October. So
that's great. Well, I can't wait to get a copy. That's awesome. So,
thanks.
If there's anything, but I'm going to definitely bug you when we get closer to publication date. If I can have you back on, I would love to have you back on. I'd love to show off the book. And if those of you guys, again, are unfamiliar with Stacey's work, check out STACYPEARSALL.com. Did I get it right?
Yes.
Okay, great. And just super grateful for who you are, what you mean to our industry, and honestly, just as a friend, I'm just proud to call you friend. And thanks for being on today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.